to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn, joined as always by Alan and James. Alan, how are you doing this week? Both you and I had trouble getting to our respective locations for this recording, didn't we? We were kind of running in last minute, breathless, while James was sitting tapping his proverbial watch.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning day today here in sunny South Yorkshire and out in Derbyshire. So I went for a lovely walk in the countryside. And then, of course, the trains let me down, So I was skidding in at the last minute here. So looking a bit red. I've just managed to get a shower, but I've been out in the sun all day. It's a beautiful day today. Blue skies, bright sunshine. So, yeah.
Well, I didn't have quite as nice a view. I was nose to tail on the M80 trying to get back from work, and it was slightly less enjoyable commute home from work than you maybe had out in Derbyshire, but we move, as the kids say. James, how are you doing?
Well, I'm pissed now because you guys being late has ruined my day. You guys probably don't know this, but 80,000 pages of JFK files are being released imminently.
Oh,
no.
And you're keeping me from finding out whether it was the single shooter theory or what part of the CIA, the Mossad, the mob, who it was, what happened. And we're sitting here talking about some dopey deadbeat, game. I mean, what are we doing here? We have world history breaking as we speak. And we're talking
you're
about
such a good conspiracy theorist, aren't you? You're
well,
renowned
see
for
now,
it.
Alan. After today, that you realize that term was coined by the CIA as part of the JFK cover-up to discredit actual conspiracies. But we'll find out after today.
Yes, a tactic used in Scottish football coverage quite a lot.
That's right.
I was going to say.
Yes, label those with the label that thou dost most possessive. That was ever a word.
Well, in the U.S., we actually have a law called RICO that was created to prosecute conspiracies because they do actually exist. So we'll and it's remarkable for people to have lived through the COVID pandemic and to still not think about conspiracy.
Listen, let's
not get into that.
The last page of the JFK files is just going to say Lee Wallace is a grass, and that's just going to be the end of it. But no, I have to state it.
Well, let me contextualize this. If it was just Lee Harvey Oswald, Rangers finishing on Sundays was better than his. So we'll talk. That's a good segue. How about that?
I don't know about that. I have to say it does bring to mind a school project I did when I was about 12 years old on the JFK assassination, which I proudly gave to my mother to read, at which point she promptly burst out laughing because it apparently contained the line, brain matter splattered all over the car in the street in Dallas, and then they knew something was wrong. At which point my mum said, yeah, it took until that exact point for them to know something was wrong yet. But listen, I've always had a way with words. Speaking of which, James, not to point the finger too much and say we told you so, but subscribers to the Huddle Breakdown will know that the result against Rangers at the weekend, which has come as a shock to so many, may not have come as a shock if they had consumed some of the output that has been put up on the huddlebreakdown.com. Am I giving you guys too much credit by saying that?
Probably.
No, I disagree, Alan. So there's times to, obviously we're not happy about the result. But Alan and I pride ourselves, we spend a lot of time doing this crap. Right, we allocate a lot of our lives to analyzing Celtic, and when we do a better job at it than other people at times, I'm not claiming some kind of omnipotence or omniscience. Forecasting the future is hard. It's hard enough to analyze the past, let alone the future. So we wouldn't make any declarative like this is going to happen. That would be ridiculous. But we did a really good job over many pieces last week, including the podcast with you, Laura, and then the preview podcast with Martin, basically laying out why this was a game with material jeopardy in many dimensions. Everything from the league's over, that level of intensity from the players might be down a little bit, to the tactical setup and how if Barry Ferguson basically followed the similar script as Clement had deployed in the Cup final and the January 2nd game. all of these things, and that was even before McGregor being out and Trusty being out, declared out. See, I think we have a justifiable right to brag a little bit, not about the result, obviously, but about the quality of the analysis we did last week leading into it. Because if you'd listened and read what we put out, you would have been like, oh, this makes sense, that makes sense, bam, boom, boom, boom. The whole game would have been like, well, it's, that's kind of like what they laid out could happen, including the throw-ins sucking, by the way. So,
I was about to say, by the way, they need to get on the phone to Thomas and try and get something organised here, because it really could make a difference, I think.
Yep. So, but yes, that's enough of us tooting our own horn. Let's get into analyzing the game, because again, if you read what we wrote last week, a lot of what we're going to talk about now is going to be like, yep, but check that box. And Alan did a great job writing multiple pieces late in the week, basically laying a lot of this stuff out, and it was just kind of unsurprising. Now, having said all that, I wrote a piece on Monday, basically called "The Opposite Derby Dust," which was the glowing insanity that came out of the first win of the season in the first derby, when I uttered the phrase, they won the midfield battle, right? Remember that controversy and that viral, right? The opposite of that is now happening. People being called lazy, cowards, all this stuff. People just go berserk after these games, which, again, understandable, but our job's to do the opposite of that. That's what we're here for, is to try and be objective. So that's the goal today, is to try and break out this horrible result and, horrible first half performance, which we'll get into.
Yeah, Alan, I'll pass over to you on that cue. I know that you guys will obviously go into a little bit more depth with Martin at the end of the week as far as your analysis of the game concerns, but what was your overall impression of the game? Because I think I quite enjoy talking to you guys, because actually I've listened to all the Celtic content that I can, and it's so hyperbolic at the moment in terms of... And I know, listen, I'd be a hypocrite if I said that I'm not hyperbolic when it comes to these situations. You're viewing it on emotion a lot of the times, but having been the person, Alan, who analyses and tries to take the emotion out of it when you do that, what did you actually see looking back on that game?
It's horrible. Oh boy. Yeah, so I had a bit of fun last night for those on subscribers, and I put out like a little competition. It was just a bit of fun, and basically just laying out side by side two sets of match data, and saying, can you guess what games these are from? And I think I shout out to Rob McGowan. He was in first, and he got it right straight away. As I say, it was just a bit of fun, really, but well done, Rob. Essentially laying out the data from the 3-0 win from Celtic at the start of the season. This season, and then some of the data from the weekend there, and there's an astonishing similarity in the match data, right? Except that on the 3-0 win for Celtic, I think the XG difference was minus 0.3 something in the Rangers' favour, and on the weekend there it was plus and 0.3 in Celtic's favour, which just goes to show. So listen, the theme really of the pieces at the end of last week were all about this question of performance versus outcome, where and it builds up into a lot more themes that we'll probably cover, not just today in passing, but in more detail certainly on Thursday, which is then about depending on the outcome, you then start to attribute things to people, in players, and to managers, and so forth. And then if you look at the performance data, these were essentially two very similar performances. The main difference being Clement's team tried to kind of play as much possession football as they could, whereas Ferguson's team was quite... I mean, listen, this is a compliment, seriously, because we've talked about how inappropriate and arrogant it is for teams to send themselves out every week to say, this is how we play. We play like this because that's the way we play, and have no regard for how the opposition is going to play and how mad that is. And that's kind of what Celtic do. and have done, right? So fair play to Barry Ferguson for going to his players. You lot are not good enough to play football, so we're going to go out and play as if you're Alloa, and that's pretty much what he did. But the actual game outcome in terms of the key metrics from the game turned out to be very similar, because the broad principles of what they were trying to do were essentially the same as under Clement, really. So the point being, as I'm labouring this again, but the point being, as we've said many, many times, is that when what they have successfully done, Clement has done, and now Ferguson over the last 2 seasons since Rodgers came back, is they've come up with a way of playing that creates enough variability and enough doubt and enough, essentially the closeness of the performance underlying metrics are such that it really comes down to sort of variance factors like finishing, goalkeeper play, refereeing decisions, that kind of thing, as to which way the result can go. Meaning that, Celtic's off-field resource dominance isn't being shown on the field. So you have to credit them for that. But as I said as a sort of punchline to my piece is, that's all well and good, and credit to them for closing the gap in terms of resources by adopting a style of play that does that. But that similar style of play then doesn't scale to playing Ross County at home, Motherwell at home, away to St Mirren, and that's the problem that they have, right? Because you can't necessarily guarantee you're going to beat Motherwell at home when you're playing like Alloa. When you're running around the pitch like lunatics, kicking everything, and then lumping the ball forward as soon as you get it, you're not. That's not how you break down teams like Motherwell or St Mirren, right? So this is the dichotomy they have. Oh, again, we'll probably come on to that more and more detail on Thursday. So listen, this was pretty horrible, but you have to again put it into context. Celtic is 16 points behind, 16 points ahead, sorry, in the league. And if we don't think that has an impact, then you're dreaming. I do wonder, and this is just speculation, now that Celtic are out of the Champions League, and I'm especially thinking of Nicholas Kuhn here, you do wonder if some players are thinking, well, that's my shop window closed. How much do I really need to care about this anymore? There's maybe a little bit of that. We've seen over the last week, by the way, if you want to find it's not a great analogy, but it's, there's none inevitably are. But you've seen Liverpool have an incredible season. I don't watch a lot of English Premier League football, I'll be honest with you, but every report I read tells me Liverpool are by far the best football team this season in the English Premier League. Been very consistent. They're a long way ahead in the league. And then over the last couple of weeks, the collapse might be too fine a point on it, but they were overwhelmed by Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League, and they were certainly overwhelmed by Newcastle in the League Cup final at the weekend over the last 2 weeks. And what's the one word I've said every time, virtually every week on this show, is consistency, apropos Celtic, right? But these are not humans. These are humans, they're not robots. As we keep saying, you get 16 points ahead. You displayed this level of consistency, both, and to get that level of consistency of performance means you've got to give that level of consistency of effort and commitment and all those things, all the physical things and mental things that go into the outcome in terms of your footballing performance. And how much can they give when they've been through that? They've basically, everyone's telling them the league's won. I'm not making excuses for the performance. We'll get into where things went wrong on a more individual basis, and especially Rodgers, if I'm honest. But you do have to look at the context of when the game has been played, how the game has been played. If they were coming to Celtic Park like they did a couple of times under Gerrard and actually playing Celtic off the field and all the performance metrics showing that they won and they deserved to win and they won well, we'd be very, very worried, right? We would be very, very worried. But this isn't that context. I'm not saying we shouldn't worry, and I'm not saying we shouldn't come up with a response to it. We absolutely should. But this isn't that, right? This is a very specific set of circumstances where a team has decided, to be fair to them, putting all vanity to one side, to play the way that Kilmarnock play, really. I was saying at Alloa, but let's say Kilmarnock, because it's essentially how Derek McInnes would love to play against Celtic and tries to play against Celtic, but doing it with better players. So you've kind of removed all your sort of, any false sense of we're a great football team, we're going to come and give them a lesson, and pretty much said, We can't match them. So we're going to kick them off the park, and we're going to put the ball in places they don't want to have the ball put, and we're going to pressure them all over the pitch. And through sheer effort and willpower, we're going to give ourselves a fighting chance. And that's pretty much what happened. It could have been 3-0 to Celtic again. That's the point, right? So, yeah, listen, we'll get into it. I'm not trying to excuse anybody, but you have to, as always, you have to look at the context.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a Rangers supporting friend of mine, very civilly, I must say, in the aftermath of the game, and she was sort of saying to me that you just need somebody to come and have a go at you at Celtic Park, and that'll rile you and that'll rattle you. And to an extent, I think there's something in that. But I think, as you say, Alan, there's an element of the style of play that they choose to adopt against teams who are better footballing sides than them works in a way that it doesn't work against teams who just bank in against them and they have to try and break down in more creative ways. And we can't deny that Rangers as a club and as a team over the past few years have beaten teams that are by far and away better footballing teams. And then you only have to look at going away to Borussia Dortmund, to a side that had Haaland and Bellingham in it, and getting a result there. There's a specific brand of chaotic football that they bring in fixtures like this that does bamboozle and unsettle us. But I do think it's fair to say that we should consider ourselves a better footballing side. All of that said, the result is the result, and you can't argue against that. James, thinking about some of what Alan said there, how much of the fixture did you? How much of it unfolding in front of you did you sort of see and think, this is going kind of the way I expected it to go, or they're approaching it the way I expected them to approach it?
Yeah, given the way they set up and started the game, it pretty much went as I thought, structurally, meaning that I thought once they committed to kind of the intensity of pressing, that they would give us major problems about build out, particularly with McGregor out. But then they would also tire. And at once that energy level started to dip, that we would start to take hold of the game. So the first half played out pretty much as I thought it could, if they committed to that game plan. Now, what was that game plan? Well, it's the same one. Again, I've been talking about it since hypothetically, as part of the context of that conversation about them winning the midfield battle in the first derby, which was the key point, this was a red flag going forward if other teams start to figure things out. And that was put on huge display in the first half of the Club Brugge game, which is basically they man-marked our midfield and pressed smartly. So not a militant, front-footed high press. Rangers did a little bit of that in the first kind of 10, 15 minutes, but then they kind of dialed back into that mid-block kind of smarter press, man-marking our midfield. And that's been our problem all season. Like, this is, when teams do that and they have pretty good athletes doing it and they play aggressively and they play with energy, that has been a big problem. We don't face it that much. We faced it against Atalanta. Atalanta completely crushed us. Go back and watch that game. It was a 0-0 draw. The result was great, but go back. Like, we couldn't even get out of our own half, basically. I mean, every time we got possession, they just took it back from us like we were taking candy from a baby. So it wasn't that extreme. That was a high press. Like, that was them, onslaughting us nonstop. This was more like the Bruges game in the first half, where we just really struggled to get out. And then when we did, we actually had a little bit of joy because they're not that good defensively once you get back to their back line and with some of the space in behind. But we were so bad in buildup. And guys, again, certain players get slaughtered, like Johnston, like Carter Vickers, like Schlupp. But there's no one available because they're getting marked out of the game. And it's not like these guys aren't moving at all, but it's not their strength. Like, we've been talking about this all season, and Bernardo wouldn't have fixed that. It's not his strength either. The one player that could have helped, but again, he gets marked out of the game. There's a reason why everyone shields him and marks him out, is McGregor, because he is the linchpin in that buildup. So we're left with this dichotomy. We talked about this in the preview show last week. Would we go long? Would we drop a second midfielder back to help him build out if they did high press? And then will we play high balls over the top? Alan and I talked about it. I think that was our consensus. Like that would be the game plan to work against that. And we saw more of that at the beginning of the second half. Now, I will say one more thing. I'll credit Harry Brady on Celtic Underground. Is something I'm echoing from what he said on their behind their paywall on their Substack after the game, is that he had heard that was the game plan and that basically the players didn't execute it in the first half. I have no idea. Harry's usually pretty tied in. So if he said that on his podcast, I'm guessing he probably heard it from somebody credible. So it's possible that somebody wasn't following. This is the other thing. Like people come out and slaughter players and managers. We don't really know the details on instructions and game plan. And going back to Dortmund, how much of it was players just losing the head going into Dortmund and not following instructions versus what was the actual game plan, right? So, we were pretty rough on Rodgers. We might have been wrong. Maybe it was the game plan. Maybe the players went off half-cocked because they were overconfident. It's hard to attribute these things as outsiders. But, so none of that part of it was that surprising. And that we were going to have trouble building out. Now, as awful as Schmeichel was, that was a little surprising. Like basically gifting a goal to Tierney that he flushed down the toilet. That doesn't happen very often. And the other part was the finishing. Like, that was a world-class finish on that header on the corner, the first goal. World-class. Like we talked about it before we went live. That was not Schlupp's fault. I mean, that was a really great run, an incredible header to the back post. That happens. Like, once every 1,000 corners, you're going to get that kind of a corner. I mean, it was just crazy. And then Igamane's finish was, give me a break. Like that's world-class, top shelf from that distance. Unstoppable. Now, were there mistakes leading up to it? Of course. But again, this goes back to what Alan wrote about last week, is that these games have been tight enough that if you get a couple of world-class finishes that score goals, and that's how we've won some of these close ones. Kyogo with brilliant finishes from 20 yards off a half yard of space and top shelving it in the corner, right? So that's how these games
at that game. Yep.
Right. So that's how these, Hatate's goals in the 3-0, the big one in early February of 22, that kind of separated us in the league that season. It was a combination of great finishing and keeper errors from McGregor, bad positioning. That's been determinative in these games, and our keeper didn't play great. Theirs played pretty well, and they had great finishing.
Yeah, you could talk about the bad position in the goalkeeper in the way that Kyogo did. I think, to paraphrase him, he said, "I didn't see the keeper, I shoot, goal, yay." It was that iconic interview. Never a truer word spoken. Alan, James brings up a lot of good points there, talking about, go back and watch the Atalanta game. We were delighted with the result, but if you actually look at the performance, it wasn't great. On the opposite side, sometimes a negative result means that players face a little bit more criticism than they perhaps deserve. I personally think probably Schmeichel, Carter Vickers and Kuhn got about as much criticism as they deserved. Some of the other players got a little bit more than they probably deserved. What was your opinion on some of the individual performances that have been under scrutiny since the game on Sunday?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and just to be characteristically pedantic, I would disagree to say that Atlanta performance wasn't a great performance. We may have been not great on the ball, or not allowed to be great on the ball, but we certainly defended very well. And that performance includes all of those elements, right? You got to defend well, you got to progress the ball well, you got to finish well, keeper's got to have a good game. That's a great performance. All of those things happen. If only some of those things happen, and you manage to get away from a difficult location with a 0-0 draw, you've probably put something into your performance that's deserved you to get that. And if I remember that game correctly, Atalanta were gradually running out of ideas the longer the game went on in terms of how they could break Celtic down. I think that was to Celtic's organisational credit. Yeah, I mean, some of the narratives in terms of individual players, I think is crazy. I want to focus. I can't excuse Kuhn's performance because that's a performance of somebody who just didn't seem to really want to be on the pitch and couldn't seem to care. I don't know where that came from, whether it is the fact that he's had a great season. He's been noticed in the Champions League. Maybe he's in Ange mode. Maybe he thinks he knows what's going to happen in the summer. I don't know. I don't know anything.
Can
I'm
I just
speculating.
interject on that before you continue? A point of frustration for me in that first half was the number of times we went down the right-hand side with Kuhn when he was getting no joy. Meanwhile, Jota is standing, arms flailing, shouting on the other side of the pitch and getting absolutely no service whatsoever. I don't know what was going on with that game plan, but why they didn't switch it up earlier, I've no idea. Anyway, continue.
No, we've not rehearsed this, but this is the point I'm going to come to, because I think you're absolutely right. So some of the stuff I've read or heard about, Carter Vickers, Johnson in particular, not showing any leadership, not showing any, being cowards or whatever as the senior players. It's absolutely ridiculous. Nobody could have tried harder in that game than those two. If you actually look at just the sheer physical effort they both put into it. No, because what was happening really, and it was again, the Celtic's approach is systemic, and when the system has glitches in it, it can kind of crumble, and that's pretty much what happened in this game. Key components of being able to progress the ball that first iteration through the initial press into their half was a bit that we were struggling with, and that starts from the back. And we've talked about this. Even McGregor is, if you look at his average position this season, slightly further forward. The onus is on the centre backs to progress the ball through that initial press. And the way that, again, as it sounds like, as Sarah Berry said, the way that you beat a sort of man-to-man press like that, where all your midfielders and all your forwards are being man-marked, is, and you've got two players in the centre that are kind of shadowing your centre-backs, as your full-backs become absolutely key. And you need to they can cause havoc because they can run with the ball, they can cause overloads, etc. And the problem we had was, Schlupp didn't get enough of the ball. Schlupp's a really good passer and he's a really good runner with the ball. And the reason for that is because we had Nawrocki at left centre-back. Now, everyone's saying, Nawrocki's the only one that had a good game. Well, kind of, in the sense that he's the only one that didn't have an absolute fuck-up at some point during the game, right? But the reason that he didn't have that was because he played so conservatively and so safely that that was never going to happen. I'm not criticising him. He's been thrown into that game, not having a minute, apart from home to Wraith Rovers and at home to Falkirk. And he was absolutely solid. He was solid in everything that he did. But solid wasn't what was needed on that day. We needed somebody to either run with the ball forward from centre-back or break lines with passes. And he whether he didn't have the confidence or didn't feel he had the, whatever it was, he wasn't doing that, which meant that every time Nawrocki got the ball, he basically passed it to Carter Vickers. So suddenly the game for Celtic is now being played between Carter Vickers and Johnson. And there was this awful period around the 60th minute when the two of them, the ball was literally stuck between the two of them and they couldn't get out. It wasn't because they weren't trying. No, Johnson had a terrible day passing. His passing was not good all game, right? Not because he wasn't trying. I would contend it's the opposite. I suspect he was trying too hard. I suspect he was taking on responsibility. Carter Vickers was taking on responsibility. They had an overwhelming amount of the ball compared to all the other players, right? We weren't getting out through the left because Nawrocki was turning back and going across every single time. So Schlupp was not getting enough of the ball. And Schlupp is an outlet, and therefore Jota was being starved of the ball. So everything went down the right. But of course, once you know that the play is being effectively stuck in that sort of right centre back position, that's quite an easy part. Yeah, it's quite an easy amount of space for you to manage and for you to defend. We became predictable. We didn't become predictable because people weren't showing leadership. In fact, in some ways, they were showing too much leadership in that they were trying to bloody make things happen, but they weren't succeeding. Carter Vickers, as we know, isn't Ruud Gullit, isn't Glenn Hoddle sat there as a sweeper pinging 50 yards onto people's toes. Sorry, old football reference for the kids out there. Look it up though, you'll see some great videos. I know James says, "Oh, we're not very good at passing out from the back." I disagree. There's not many players that play centre back in any league that pass the ball like Ruud Gullit could from centre back, or Glenn Hoddle could when he played sweeper. It's just a style of football that just doesn't right? They're competent because they play like that every week. But you remove McGregor, you remove somebody whose positioning and movement is such that it helps the team get out of those sticky situations. This was a perfect game for Scales, by the way, right? Because Scales is actually the best passer of the centre-backs that we have. You didn't need a lot of pace in that game because Czerny's not really that quick. Dessers isn't going to run away from you. Scales was the big miss. He would have actually been able to at least give us balance and actually open up the pitch, and meaning we wouldn't have been as predictable and being stuck in this right-hand corner where the two senior players were doing their damnedest to try and build the play from the back. But it was so easy to defend because it was such a narrow space. But dressing that up as lack of leadership or other bollocks like that is just nonsense, right? So, Nawrocki, bless him, had a perfectly solid game, but unfortunately, on the ball, he was a bottleneck, and it was a pressure valve through which we couldn't pass anything. Very little was going through him, and it was essential that because of their high press and because of the lack of McGregor, that's what happened. So here you've got a number of things happening, or a number of weaknesses in the team that all come together to give you this problem of we can't get through that initial press.
Yeah, that's all fair. I mean, my burgeoning love affair with Mike Nawrocki might be deflated slightly by what you've just said there. But
no, don't be. No harm to him at all. Like I said,
right, exactly. What a tough spot.
It's a tough spot for him to be in. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brutal.
I mean, I think, to be fair, like exactly what you said there was where his weakness was on the ball and starting attacks and stuff. I think where he impressed and where he has always impressed, to be honest, is he can head a ball, he can defend. Like he's good at the basics of defending, and that's
He was great, yeah.
That's probably what attracted a number of clubs to him when he ended up signing for us. But obviously when you're a team like Celtic and you're in so much possession of the ball, you need to be a much more rounded player than that, and that probably explains a little bit why he does struggle so much to get into the team. James, what do you make of Alan's assessment there of some of the individual performances? Is there any other ones that you'd like to pick out in terms of players who either maybe deserve all the flack they're getting or maybe deserve a little bit of a lighter touch?
I think the other one that deserves a little bit lighter touch is Schlupp. I thought he was okay. I mean, he wasn't a world beater, but relative to the other players, I think, this is one of the, cognitive traps we fall in, right? So early goal, hugely disappointing given the expectations and the emotions going into the game. It's like sucks the air right out of the bubble, and he's blamed. Why is he blamed? Well, obviously, because he's the guy marking the guy that scores the goal. So that's not crazy. And I'm going to write a piece later in the week going over that. It's Zapruder's film style, by the way. Keeping up with the JFK theme.
To the front, to the left.
That's right. Back and to the left. Back and to the left.
To the left. Sorry.
No, that's all right. All right. If you want to watch a famous Seinfeld episode about the magic loogie, you can go look up about that with Keith Hernandez. But I digress. But that's my cross-border analogy for the day. There were multiple things that happened on that corner. The person I thought made the biggest mistake was actually Dyson Maeda. And I'll go through that. Why? It's like, what? What the? Probably maybe the first time anyone's heard that that's watching the show. If you go back,
I will not have you slag Dyson Maeda in my company. That is unacceptable.
Crown jewels.
Right. Yep. But again, I'm not blaming anyone on that corner because it was a world-class finish. Right. It was going to be a tough one to stop no matter what. But that's the anchoring. Automatically, he's going to get blamed for that. And then for the rest of the game, anything he does wrong, confirmation bias, he's shit, he's poop, right? Bang, 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 bang. And if you go through the game, right, so there was so much that went wrong in the first half. I think what happened, and a player who didn't really do much all that wrong in the first half was Reo Hatate. Right? He was kind of anonymous, but he didn't crap the bed on anything specific. And then he lit up in the second half and really took over from, kind of a ball progression and chance creation perspective. Why? Same thing we've had all the time. When opponents slow and the intensity of pressure and the space opens up, that is like, It's time for the Hatate Symphony when those conditions are prevalent, and that's exactly what happened. So, he was absolved of any of that anchoring bias of the first half, toilet show. And then so in the second half, when we actually played okay, I thought we were fine in the second half overall in that, couple of moments. That's what happened with Schlupp. Like all of a sudden, because of the beginning of that game, the rest of what he did was horrible. And I thought he was okay. Now Johnson, I get, like, he was really bad on the ball, but even he got forward, made some runs. Like, he had quite a bit of even above and beyond the, I think, very important analysis that Alan laid out as far as the mess that was that him and Carter Vickers were kind of thrown into tactically. And I think the other part of this is we had two other midfielders other than Hatate that are not great being man marked on the half turns. This goes back to, I take Alan's point on the passing from the center backs, but it's also difficult when you have midfielders that aren't great and a hold up striker that can't hold the freaking ball up that I've been talking about all season about, right? If you're going to make a pass into this guy who's getting man marked, you got to be perfect with that pass. You can't be off a little half step. You got to get them on the half turn in the perfect placement positionally and anticipate the movement on the run as they're trying to get open. The margin for error there is very small unless, you're going to someone who's like Hatate. Hatate's a little better at collecting those balls and making those moves. McCallum, not so much. They're not technically as good. Engels, I think, is not good at that, at the level that he needs to be a focal point in a 4-3-3, the only holding midfielder in the build-up to be able to break that kind of press. So now I'll add another layer. What Alan's saying is that you got this mess that Carter Vickers and Johnson are trying to play out. Half of the pitch is the only thing that's available. They have a center back they can't pass to because it's going to come right back to them. And they got two midfielders who can't get away or, create enough space to create enough room for the risk not to be really high. So at some of the times they're hesitant to push. Why would you be hesitant playing a ball into Adam Ida or Luke McCowan as they're sprinting back towards you with a guy right on him? Same with Maeda. Maeda's not a hold-up striker either. Like he's technically, the ball just bounces off of him sometimes. Right? That's not one of his strengths. So all of a sudden now you're getting, a flood on the counterattack because we've given the ball away. So that apprehension is a natural byproduct of a bunch of players who aren't necessarily great in this facet of play. It creates hesitancy. You overthink it. We talked about this with Johnston. Like this is a problem he had in Europe. Anytime we've had this kind of an opponent that put that kind of pressure on, guys jumping, I called it jumping routes, like a free safety in American football, decoying us into thinking a guy's open and then jumping it, right? That's what Bruges did brilliantly, and Atalanta to a degree. So, I think this is all important context as to why these guys look so bad, but none of it's new. None of it's new, and made much worse, I think, from McGregor's absence, and half of the game with a second striker coming in that add, basically nothing in that part of the game. If actually negative for the most part, usually gives the ball right back in a bad spot to the other team in build-up.
Yeah, do you know, James, I love listening to your breakdown, and it really, I'm so interested in it, and then you drop something that makes you sound so American, and I have to kind of...
I'm so sorry.
I have to kind of like recenter myself, and I'm like, right.
Said no American ever.
Not all of us can win this. Not all of us can win the sperm lottery, Laura. Sorry.
No, well, well, listen, the less said about that, the better, I think. But no, the thing I was going to ask you just before I go back to Alan is, Alan talked about, you've both given a really detailed breakdown, which obviously you're going to go into more detail at the end of the week, on Celtic's performance. Alan alluded to it earlier about Rangers essentially kicking anything that moved for certainly large parts of the opening part of the game. And I do agree. They were targeting McCowan in the middle of the park. They were targeting Engels. They were targeting Kuhn. All the obvious targets. What else did they do you think? Or what is it about their chaotic style of play that can prove so overwhelming for teams that maybe don't expect it. And I say don't expect it because we've seen them do it in Europe so much against teams who maybe don't know them as well. It frustrates me that I have to say don't expect it in Celtic's case because they should. But anyway, my question being, what is it? What's so effective that they're able to do that we just couldn't seem to handle on Sunday?
I'll go quick. I mean, I think it was more so this combination of a reasonable system that's kind of, like I said it last week. It's like our kryptonite, like with our relative weaknesses and how the pieces of our puzzle fit together in our squad. This way of playing, letting the center backs have the ball and man marking the midfield. And I thought, and I said this on the preview show, them going to like a 3-4. It ended up being like a 5-3-2 functionally. But basically what that did is it created a midfielder with a wing back to basically, double up on our wingers, right? So that they had a system that was pretty well crafted in order to, attack our weaknesses and to try and alleviate against our strengths. So that part, I thought it was smart the way they were set up in that regard. I don't think they did anything necessarily like mind blowing from a performance perspective. And in fact, we were, outside of the finish, other than the finishing, like the finishing was brilliant, but they flushed multiple chances down the toilet. I mean, this is back to the final third decision making that they've not been. And this is part of the reason why they have trouble breaking down Ross County and Motherwell and all these other teams, is that when you get them in the final third, their decision making stinks, and that's pretty pervasive across their players. So they had multiple sequences, even in the second half. Bad touch from Dessers wide, and Barron's shot. Like, there was multiple times when they didn't reflect in the XG because shot never came. Like that, it's amazing that they did not get a shot off on that ball that Schmeichel gave to Czerny. I mean, it's incredible that you could screw that up that bad. So that was emblematic of on the day and them systemically, like throughout the season. Like, they're just not that great at decision making. But what happens in Europe and then against us is because of the game becomes chaotic and frenetic, those chances kind of just are emergent. They don't require any thinking. They're reacting. Like that Igamani finish was just a reaction. I mean, you saw when he had the decision to make. What was the decision? Let me try and plow through this guy, right? And the ball just happened to bounce off of our guy, boop, boop, and then it was laying there on a platter, and he just absolutely, howitzered it. I think that, again, emblematic. It was random, kind of frenetic, boom. And that's where Dessers is finished in Europe that way. Like these opportunities that kind of fall to you, and they seize on them. Anything where they've got to kind of work through a process to try and create, I think they, the more time, the worse. And you saw that in their buildup. Like, again, Alan's point, going back to the Kilmarnock analogy, the couple of times they did try to build up, they basically gave us a scoring chance. I mean, almost direct off of the pass one time. It was almost like an assist from Balogun. So, again, to their credit, they were, maybe we shouldn't do this. And they were just launching it. So nothing on an individual, other than the finishing. And they were physical. I mean, but again, that doesn't take talent. It just takes, motivation and willingness for them to bounce back and put forth a lot of effort a couple of days after a tough game. Like, so I think the credit they're due is just that. I mean, the motivation, the vigilance, following their plan, which was a good one, and executing it with vigilance.
Yeah, Alan, I think listening to what James said there and some of the other content that I've consumed since the match, there is a little bit of panic going on among some of the Celtic support and a little bit of overconfidence among some of the Rangers support that maybe the gap isn't as big as first perceived. I'm trying to say that with a straight face. But we are talking about a Rangers team here who lost a 2-0 lead against us, and really, as James says, won the game with an individual moment of brilliance from Igamami. They lost against Motherwell. They conceded 2 very quick early goals against Kilmarnock, and their miraculous victory over Fenerbahce was essentially because of one game and then penalties. They lost the game at Ibrox 2-0 relatively convincingly. So I guess what I'm asking is, is there less of a gap than people think between us and them, or is it a case of, as you said before, the circumstances of the game, the fact that we are so far ahead in points and all of that, has that just had such an impact on the way that both we and they played that it just can't be ignored?
Well, nothing can be ignored. I mean, I think what we've set out last week was the fact that actually, despite winning 5 games, including a League Cup final and a Scottish Cup final against them, and winning the league by a distance and being a distance ahead in this league, in games against them, over 8 matches over 2 years, there's barely a slither between the teams when it comes to actual underlying performances, and that's to their credit. I mean, because of the way that they've set up, which has been increasingly pragmatic but sensible in terms of what they're facing and what their own limitations are. Just very quickly, They had one move, I believe, in the whole game that involved more than 4 passes, and that was the second goal. That was a really good goal, and it was another great finish, actually, by the way. But that was the only time they put together 4 passes.
You're right.
The way that they generally have played all season, and this is their own supporters that say this, is that they rely on moments. They rely on moments. Now, it's almost classic Jose Mourinho. I know they all were all idolising when they were playing Fenerbahce, and actually, this is how Jose Mourinho used to set up his teams. When he was in charge of teams that had a lot of money and what have you, and were very well resourced. But Inter Milan against Barcelona probably being the classic occasion, where Barcelona, obviously had it was their kind of, arguably the greatest club sides ever, Messi and Xavi, Iniesta, all that lot, and they basically, he Mourinho'd them because, listen, football, the easiest thing to coach in football is defence, right? It just is because it comes down. It doesn't rely on the individual brilliance of players. It relies on collectivism. It relies on people following instructions, and it relies on effort. And generally, professional footballers can do all those things, right? So it makes sense, to focus on defence. It's very difficult to coach a team to play like, for example, how Angie's team did, even against the likes of St Mirren and Ross County and all that, what have you, to coach, movement and overloads and interactions at high speed at the top end of the pitch in congested areas. That's difficult. But defense is relatively easy. And when you're just prepared, and listen, I'm not decrying this. This was a very wise thing to do. Again, I think we talked about. I can't remember which game it was now that Celtic lost, where I said that the opposition effectively took the risk out of the game by simply just not playing the ball around at the back. Because you saw what happened when as James said, when the few occasions when they did, it was almost chaos for them. It was almost disaster. They had 4 pack turnovers the whole match, right? And why was that? Because Celtic's pressing wasn't any good. Celtic couldn't get near them to press because as soon as they got it, they just launched it up the field. But that makes sense because you're basically, what you're saying our defenders are not good enough to play out from the back, or this team presses really well. So we're just going to negate that risk by just simply launching it up the pitch. Now, more often than not, we might lose possession, but we're set up to expect that. We're set up to press high in response to that. And therefore, we're not going to lose the ball in dangerous areas. And they did that really well. You got to give credit for that. But as I say, essentially, it was a defensive strategy. It was close down, stop them playing, which is fine. That's exactly what you need to do. This is what Celtic should be doing more of. Stop the opposition. Doing what they like to do. This is what has been a main criticism of Rodgers, I think. And then they got the moments because it isn't Kilmarnock. They have got better players than Kilmarnock, and especially in the finishing. I mean, if you think back to the 3-0 game that I had a little bit of fun with, we had Butland's positioning error for Kyogo's goal. But first of all, before that, we had Tavernier sleeping at the back post and Maeda score. Oh, actually, that happened on Sunday as well, didn't it? Yeah, so forget about it. But then you had McGregor's goal that was deflected into the top corner, right? We got the breaks. We got the bits of luck. It might have looked like great finishing, but, and in a sense it was, but we got the breaks. Roll forward to put together a similar kind of scenario, and guess who gets the breaks? Not us, but that's not unexpected, right? So all credit to them. Again, I come back to what they did was essentially play. It was kind of anti-football. We don't want the ball. You have the ball. You make mistakes. We'll pressure you into mistakes. That took a lot of energy. And it was very brave of them to play that way, given they'd gone to extra time 3 days before, to press that high, to press that aggressively, to chase players around man for man all over the pitch for that length of time. And these players must have been feeling a bit jaded after their exertions on Thursday, but they actually set out to play the most kind of energy sapping style of football you can possibly play, because we don't want the ball, so we're never going to have the ball, so we're basically going to be constantly chasing you around. That's exhausting. But they got away with it. Moments of magic, and they've got away with it. I say got away with it because, again, the underlying data against Fenerbahce was Fenerbahce should have won those games, right? It's pretty clear. Celtic, but and that's true in many of these other European games. But the point being, you're playing a better team. You introduce as much variance as you can. You limit their ability to play. And you introduce as much variance whereby you may take advantage of that chaos. That's what they did, and you've got to give them credit for that. If that had been, Wraith Rovers that we've been playing at the weekend, and we'd end up losing 1-0, you just said, bloody well played. Good luck to you. And that's essentially the template. That kind of team. That's how they played. I come back to it doesn't work in the other 34 games in the season. That's the problem that they have. But if they do find a manager that can play like this against Celtic and play like Ange did against the other 34 teams, then we're in big trouble.
Yeah, just when you're saying they got away with that, just flashing into my head is that Jesse Pinkman meme of they can't keep getting away with this. That is the frustration I have. Is as much as the narrative is, well, this game doesn't matter and the league's ours anyway, and blah blah blah. I'm beyond the point of getting satisfaction from hearing that St Mirren beat them or Motherwell beat them. I don't really care as much about that if we are not beating them, because it just doesn't feel like there's plenty of supporters out there say I'll take 4 losses against Rangers over the season if we win the treble, and I know that that's a very privileged sort of dilemma to present yourself with, but there would be something at the back of my brain, just a little itch of like, yeah, but we didn't beat them. And I hope, I guess that brings me to my final question, James. Has Brendan got a little bit of a weak spot for Rangers at the moment in terms of being able to overcome them? Am I being too harsh on him? We've talked about being harsh on the players or whatever. Am I being too harsh on him, saying that maybe there's a little bit of a weakness there that he needs to kind of review and strengthen if he can? Because I feel like we talked about it last week. He was so confident with his rhetoric last week and this week that I almost felt like, well, he must be pretty damn sure he's got them licked and he's going to do something here. And it obviously proved it wasn't the case, which is now making me reassess and think, was he taking it seriously enough? Is that too harsh?
I'd be shocked if he didn't take it serious enough. I think the bigger concern is that he thought it would work and it didn't. Meaning that, now again, this is where it kind of makes sense, the scenario from what Harry Brady relayed on his podcast, because the idea that he would be that, as I said it on Thursday, that he would peacock like that last week. And then we kind of didn't do much different in that first half. So, the idea that was the plan, I think, would be surprising. So it makes sense to me that there was some kind of organizational issue or confusion, or which, again, that's the manager's responsibility ultimately. So, he's got to, I think, take the heat at least to a degree if that's the scenario. But that there's, being a Methodist and a Lutheran, or they're kind of adjacent Protestants, right? Right? They're kind of cousins. We don't want to get into cousins again too much, right?
I don't pay attention to that
or
side
religious
of things.
denominations, I suspect, James.
Right?
To be honest with you.
Oh, come on! I'm getting to an analogy here, but Rodgers is of a certain footballing church, and he's actually pretty close to Ange Ball. And we've been complimentary to him this season because he's kind of not been as doctrinaire and been willing to be more flexible in Europe. But he's not going to turn into a Jehovah's Witness. And so this idea that he's going to turn around and play long ball and shell, and basically we're going to get into a Kilmarnock versus Alloa game with Barry Ferguson managing both. It's not going to happen. So, I think, does he have the personnel to be able to implement his strategy against this level of an opponent playing this style of football? I still have questions. Like, I don't know if there is a solution. I've been saying it all season long. Like, that might be an intractable problem that we have because of recruitment, not because of, coaching or tactics. I would like to see at least some difference, like, a little bit more extreme, like dropping in that second midfielder. Like, I'd like to see Hatate next to McGregor, two guys that can actually help with build up, and one of them can play those long balls over the top. That would be probably radical for most of the support, my guess would be, because they're two wee guys that aren't defensive. But, as Alan said, defending's a lot about positioning and discipline and effort. So I think we'd be fine. But yeah, I think the lack of incremental radicalism is a fair criticism. I just don't think this kind of reactionary criticism, like he should turn into something he's completely not, nor will ever be. It's just unrealistic.
I don't think any of us can change Brendan Rodgers. Brodge will brodge, and he will continue to do so. It actually takes me back to the conversation that was had around the Dortmund game, and the fact that on the back of a 7-1 defeat, he said, I'm not going to change my approach, when he evidently then went on and did it. So I think Brendan Rodgers will only show us what he wants to show us, and that's just the way that he is. James, Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure this week again. Despite the result at the weekend, I think we've tried to have a level head in how we dissect it and how we react to it. You guys are obviously going to go into a lot more detail at the end of the week with Martin. If anybody wants to hear that in full, you will obviously be able to find that on thehuddlebreakdown.com, where we would really appreciate your company to read and react to all the other content that we're putting out there as well.